All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is a Tuesday, February 25. It is just after 4 p.m., and this is a meeting of the Policy Committee of the School Board of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. Sitting next to me on either side are our committee members. So we've got Mr. Donaldson and Dr. Temez here, and joining us from the administrative team, we have Dr. Wimmer and Mr. Harder. So we'll call this meeting to order. Let's stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, everyone. We'll proceed to our discussion items. First, we have our cycle of review, and Superintendent Wimmer, will you walk us through that discussion, please?
Just reminding that we have a cycle of review for our policies. We're largely on track, but we maintain a 3-year rotating cycle, so you can see those batches before you. So tonight we'll have the 2 and 700 series. We'll come back in May at our next committee meeting to pick up the 600 series. But I put a note in there on curriculum and want to just extend the invite to the policy committee members. The 300 series largely deals with instruction. I foreshadowed that to the curriculum and instruction committee because they need to have a hand in that, and this is the perfect kickoff. We had wanted to, from a policy committee standpoint, engage students in the policy process, so we will actually be forming a team and using that series to start the discussion. So we don't have to culminate that work, or it might come in batches over time from that team, but that's what we're going to begin doing with that series. So then we'll keep bringing that forward. So I'm going to start mapping that out with the students. We have students both in leadership positions and other students we do an all-call who's interested in policy or want to do that. So as soon as I get kind of some of those schedules, I'll send it out to you. I know that you had expressed interest to engage with students on those pieces, so I'll look at that and try and create an optimal schedule there. But I just wanted you to know that I'll kick off that work. Might not come here for a while, and you might be engaged elsewhere in starting those conversations. But that's the one. It's got things that are of just immediate interest to kids, their graduation, their credits, all their learning. So it's a great series to kind of kick off with that student group that you had envisioned. And again, 2 and 700 tonight, and then 600 in May.
Great, thank you. Questions, committee members? All right, seeing no questions, let's proceed then with policy 119, high school configuration review process.
Sure. This is the question around should we continue to be 2 high schools or go into 1? We have reviewed this prior, and then we had talked about this, came up when we were doing our facilities review, and the board made the decision to not commingle the question as part of our facilities referendum. That we wanted it to continue to remain and be separate. So I am going through these pieces. It came up during the facilities process. It comes up quite a bit, especially as we look at consolidating teams, our most recent gymnastics and wrestling, around calling that question. So there's a discrete process. The one thing that we had talked about potentially revisiting is in step 3, it requests a non-binding referendum requirement, and it's holding me to gubernatorial or presidential elections. And I think people are kind of calling for that process to start sooner and earlier than delaying on that. So I'd like to kind of seek your thoughts on removing that time frame. And then I also forwarded to the Wisconsin Association School Boards Legal Counsel on, do we have the authority to ask for a non-binding referendum question on a ballot? So I've got a little bit of info about that. They're saying there's nothing really specific in school parts of the statutes, and they talk around some of the authority. I know I had sent it on to you with your legal mind, Mr. Swigert, to take a look. So I got a legal answer that's like, well, yes and no, is how I'd put it. So I think that needs to be vetted a little bit further by a legal agency that is very familiar with referenda questions, because we want something that engages our community in the process. But I just want to double check that I have the authority to do that, and if I have any other kind of things that bind me on when I could do that.
John?
Yeah, so
limiting it to the presidential or gubernatorial election cycle, is that more for turnout?
I think it's
Getting more engaged?
So I think it's turnout, and I think that's historical, that predates any of us, maybe how these conversations went in the past. What I would envision, when I look through, this is a healthy process that has us bringing forward a really rich representative committee. I don't think that existed before. I think every now and then they would periodically call the question. I would look for a really intense engagement, just like we had with facilities, where we're really asking for not just representation with a task force, but then we're going into community meetings, we're doing kind of a little bit more robust engagement. We could look at surveying the community as part of it as well. You know, that isn't really spelled out that we do or don't have to. Maybe that's a committee recommendation when they look at that. But it calls for a task force that has rich representation. I think, to your point, it was just trying to drive as much awareness as possible.
And for me, I think it would be sad to lose some of the rivalry and stuff that, but with the low enrollment and people, you know, combining anyways, I've actually heard a lot. I mean, people have talked to me about just because it would bring cohesion to the community also with one team to chant for and,
Yeah.
you know.
And I was on the phone taking a call about rumors swirling today, you know, well, do you have enough for football and do you have this? And because the youth team is already consolidating out in the community, that's not our team, but it's the youth program, all of those things. So again, we heard this enough where it's time to formally call the question and start the process.
Yeah, I think
with that,
people
so-
would like to see that around
Yeah.
here. That's what I've heard at least see what the community is saying.
Right.
I'd be on board.
Yeah, I would agree, and too, I was not here when this was adopted, but it sure does seem that the theme is that the idea of the referendum would be done at a time when there would be healthy turnout. I mean, I think of just recently, I voted an absentee ballot, and the only thing on the absentee ballot was, I think it was the superintendent, the state superintendent of schools, and that one, I'm sure, is probably not going to have a great turnout. So
Right.
probably that's one. But I like the idea of, let's start to make sure, first of all, that a referendum is even a possibility. Because if
Yep.
the answer is no, then we should think of something else.
So I just want to make sure, I'll get that legal. If I find out something in the interim, then I can certainly take that right to the full board for consideration if we have to tweak something legally. Otherwise, you know, is there anyone that would want to see that removed if it were legal? You know, maybe that's something we take to the board, because I am recommending we at least remove the timeline associated. We could bring this for further discussion and legal guidance to the full board.
Have we ever sent a survey to like the students?
No,
Like,
not
district-wide?
not recently on this topic. I don't know
Be interested
how
to see
they
what their
did process
side
in the
and then
past.
Compared to the rest of the community, because they don't get to
Mm-hmm.
vote, obviously, but it's their schools also.
Yeah, I would recommend, you know, I'm sure a task force, because it has to have representation of students and those pieces,
Gotcha.
that they should be surveying the different groups and stakeholders in a decision like that. I would advocate, you know, that you're reaching all the way down into your middle school, because they're on the cusp of high school, and this impacts them. They should be engaged in that process.
So before we were to form any kind of a formal task force to look into this, I'm assuming that there, from an administrative standpoint, we would want to have all the information on hand around, like, what would that look like for us athletically? Like, what conference would that put us in? How would that change things for us that way? Does it change funding for us? Does it change, you know, a lot of things that I'm sure the community is going to have great input, like this is what I want, or this is what I would hope,
Right.
or whatever. But what I would want to know is if we're going to do something like this and bring this large group of people somehow together or communicating, I'd want to have all of the administrative and like, this is absolutely what will happen if this happens, ready to go before
So
we.
not dictated in that process, to your point, the board, the pieces that the board need, I would foresee, because you have to put it up for a discussion item first, and then you have to wait a month, and then you can take action of, do you want to convene this group? So to me, we should be mapping out, like, those are all the pieces I need to bring forward to the discussion, so you can determine, are you or aren't you going to convene that committee on that?
Yeah, I don't have a problem convening a committee at some point. I just, like I said, I think that there should be some internal work or a rubric of some kind internally laid out about absolutes, like here's what this would look like for us if we did a combination. and then engage the community with like, here's what we know.
So.
And then get feedback on what they think
Yeah,
about that.
so to me, I'd be bringing those forward to that discussion item, to the board, so that
Okay.
you can then you can think about it, and then it has to sit, and we inform everyone in that month before then the board takes action. So you have enough information, to your point, what are the implications of this, before I send
Yeah.
it out and have people who are gonna have feelings and this, that, if there's gonna be
Yeah.
disaster afoot.
My only thought was if we engage the, I guess if it's just from the admin perspective of kind of laying out, where everything is, I guess you just don't want to get ahead and get people talking,
Riled up.
is what I was kind of, that's the only concern I would see with kind of, getting things moving before we actually get the engagement.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that's a bad thing to kind of have some outlines of, as long as it's kind of,
Why don't we?
Covered
to-
by-
To that point, and you're three of a group, so now that we need to figure out, are you gonna call the question or not, right? People are asking, to that point. So I think we could schedule this as a discussion item on our upcoming agenda and frame out, some of the things you were saying, Dr. Temez, on, here's what I need as a board member for this next step. I can get that legal follow-up, and then we can get everyone's thoughts, opinions, and put together a little bit more of a matrix. So what does that discussion item need to include to be robust enough for a board to make a decision? I think we could do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'd be okay calling, having it as a discussion item so that that would be a place we could formally lay out the requests we would have for information before we officially act on convening a committee
Yeah.
of the general public.
I think that would be helpful, too.
I think it's good to get feedback from the entire board. We are 3 of 7, and
Yeah.
if 4 of our other members would say, we are not touching this isn't happening, well, then that's a different story.
Right.
But I would say we have the benefit of having gone through this process with the facilities referendum and the listening sessions. Not to say we're well practiced at this, but I think the spirit of this is that we have lots of opportunity for community input. And so I think the idea of asking the board, are we amenable to exploring, starting this process?
And what
then
do you need?
And then what do we need? And with regard to the referendum, if legally that is an option, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. If we think that there's another option that allows us to pretty reliably get input from the entire community, and we think maybe it would be even more effective. I mean, in some cases, what I like about a referendum is, there it is, it's, yes or no. What I like about some of the other ways that we've reached out to the community, for instance, with the facilities referendum, is it's not just a yes or no, but it's what's most important to you and what do you need to do, and there's that richness that you don't necessarily just get with a referendum. So in any case, let's just start with the board to see if we're interested in this. Let's see if the referendum's an option, but I'm open to crafting this however we need to have confidence that we've got good input from our community.
And I think as part of the discussion question, I'd also want to know what the goal of doing it is. Like, is this just an arbitrary thing that we're like, well, we've been asked about it, so let's talk about it? Or is there some goal in mind, like we see this as a large cost-saving measure, or we see this as a bigger opportunity for our athletics department, or whatever the case is? I would just want to know
Purpose.
what's the purpose of doing this?
Yeah, I was gonna say also, I would just kind of before we get there, maybe something to think about is, futures of athletic numbers and stuff like that. If we can have something like that potentially ready for the discussion, I'd like to see, because obviously if you have to A and a B's team or something, if we're gonna combine, you just don't. High school's the one opportunity most kids get to participate in a lot of these athletics, and you don't want to have people getting cut or not being able to do something. So that's kind of, that's kind of a concern I can see somebody bringing up. Hey, my kid likes this sport, and now we're going to have twice as many people to compete against to get a position. So,
Yeah.
that'd be an interesting number to see if. And I know we've combined a lot of
Yeah,
the
there's
clubs and stuff,
nothing
so.
that stops us from co-oping either internally, east and west. You see that there's already procedures in place for this, and then we, being the largest in the area, hold a lot of co-ops for the region or the county. Both of our hockey teams just made regional champs, both the Lightning and the Ice Bears, and those are county and regional teams. So there's things in place that help us. So to Chad's point around what's the purpose then, if you have these pieces, what's the greater purpose of that? I think it'll be a good discussion to lay out a little bit more on kind of what do we really need to dig into and present, so that we're making thoughtful decisions.
Agreed, and I think just kind of starting ending where we began, which is, I too, during the listening sessions, heard interest in exploring this option from several community members. And so
Yeah.
I think it is something that's worthy of
Yeah, and
continued
it's,
consideration.
and it's natural, like I said, when you make these announcements, most recently on wrestling and gymnastics, co-oping formally, you've got always people buzzing around football and, what about if we co-opt and would we be more competitive and those kinds of things, there's nothing that stops you from some of those points. So it certainly is buzzing all around. So let's start there. Perfect,
All right.
thank you.
Great. Why don't we move then to Policy 166, Board Member Electronic Communications for discussion.
Yeah, this is one we actually took out of committee and brought to the full board because it was substantial updating of the language. You see the old language actually formally crossed out. Everyone has seen the language in green that was presented to the board. There was no feedback from that. I'd like to just go ahead and bring this forward to the board for consideration.
Committee members, any questions? I do remember that it's been a little while since we last met, but that is a good refresher. I do remember seeing this, and we did take it to the board, you're right, and no comments in the interim?
Nope.
Then any objections to bringing it back to the board for adoption?
This would come back as an action item?
It'd come back as a first reading.
reading.
So it just,
reading.
I'm formalizing the first reading on the language
Yeah,
in green.
It should come back, yep.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because then if there are concerns, we yet have opportunity for additional input. All right, let's proceed that way then. On to Policy 830, Use of Facilities.
So 830 is in the 800 series. It would be up for kind of formalized review next year. However, we did have a board member and community member ask us to accelerate that review as an end user, and that was something that Mr. Harder, in his role as Director of Facilities, had been aware of and kind of exploring. So we're just bringing that forward for conversation right now. So I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Harder.
All right, good evening, committee members. Steve said I'm on camera, so I'm good.
you're good?
I checked with
Okay.
him, so we're good there. So the policy in front of you, 830, has last reviewed 8 years ago. And this is really the policy, the administrative rule tied to the Silver Lining Arts Center and a fee schedule around groups using our facilities here. And so in the last year and a half that I've been role of facilities director here, we've been looking at ways to streamline usage of our facilities, make them more available to our community. However, with that comes additional cost burdens on our operational expenditures and so forth. There are also random little oddities in there of things that just have not changed over time with language and so forth. And so I had handed out a document this evening to kind of paraphrase a little bit about what we would talk about. One, just to review our current policy groupings, feedback from us. I have some feedback from a board member, community member who has gone through this. Some comparison of some different spaces that are often rented by numerous districts. And then what we're really seeking is some direction from the three of you before we go back and put pen to paper and changing the whole policy at that point in time. So currently our policy is really built on the fact that there are 8 different groupings of people who can use our facilities. Group number 1 being the school district, all the way out to 8 being a for-profit business. Then they are broken down into tiers with 3 different pricing tiers. And all of those different groups sometimes pay a fee, sometimes do not. So groups 5 through 8 are charged a facility usage fee. That could be $10 a room, that could be $150, it could be $130, depending upon what the space is that goes with it. Other groups do not pay a facility fee, they just pay a staff fee. Sometimes that is if we don't have staff on hand. So for example, if you wanted to, if you were one of those groups and you wanted to use Green Tree's gym on the weekend, we do not staff Green Tree Elementary typically, so you would pay the fee for that person to work from facilities. Other ones are mandated a custodial staff fee that go with that. In reviewing our current policy and looking at some of the comparisons before we get there, we have some areas of feedback that we believe should be considered by the committee. Number one is the need to clean up our categories. We have too many of them, And they're very confusing because people know the names that they know. So one often that we get confused with is youth sports here. I'm a junior Sun, I'm a junior Spartan, I am youth football. That is not a school-sponsored activity. They may use our name, they may be aligned with our programming. However, sometimes our coaches and groups will come in thinking they don't pay anything at all. They have 24/7 access, no different than maybe a athletic team at the high school would have for basketball at that point in time. And because there are so many of them, it gets real wishy-washy where people get placed, because you can find all these little ins and outs of it. And you'll see further down, I have some comparisons on that. So number one, we would like to shrink the number of groups. Number two, we continue to see that increase of usage of facilities. It increased the cost of our operational building budget, utilities, maintenance of that space, the wear and tear of that space, and staff. As we continue to see our buildings used on the weekends and we want to open them up more, it puts more reliance on the current staff that we have working overtime. Sometimes that's mandated overtime, so we have people who are on every third weekend, they're mandated to work overtime. So looking at ways to make this very consistent and then adjust staffing appropriately for that. And we have some ideas of how other districts have handled that. The other thing we would like to do is over time, it's not been real clear when the facilities calendar opens up and what that process is and who gets first priority and who does not. We believe as a system, our kids, our district-sponsored events get priority one. Some of the policy examples that I put out there actually have very descriptive dates when everything opens up by group. And we would suggest that that gets put into a policy or administrative rule when we come back, so that that is outlined very clear to anybody out there, so it's not Tim's decision or Ms. Wimmer's decision this year and, you know, all these different types of things. Because we don't have things in policy, sometimes that date changes and that process changes. The other piece we know is that our Silver Lining Arts Center, through the donations of our community, is one of the prize pieces that often gets used here. It has the most usage besides our gyms. And with that, we have many returning groups, and there's a past practice of if, you know, Mr. Temez had the, the facility last year from this time to this time, and as an outside group, he kind of had first dibs the next year as we go there. We see that in some policies where you have the right to say 2 weeks after your event, 3 weeks after your event. I would like the similar booking next year, as long as it does not conflict with a school district event at that point in time. And we would like to put that into writing so that is clear. Ideally, we would love to be able to fill the Silver Lining Arts Center 12 months out of the year and basically know who's in there every single year and have it full all the time. And so that helps organize those slots as we move different groups around. Many of our groups use the same types of time slots. However, this year, we have a time where we're going to make an adjustment because our internal groups have some conflicting between two student opportunities, and they are drawing from the same groups of kids, reducing numbers in both. But we would like to write that into our administrative rule and policy at that point in time. And then number 5, we want to clean up some of the reduced extra fees, charges for spaces. So like one that's in there, if you rent a classroom, if you want to use the projector or the TV, you have to pay extra. If you borrow the space or you rent the space, just use it. It's also, every little item like that turns into a record-keeping nightmare here. And so Laura, who you met when you came in the door today, gets to manage all of that. It becomes a record-keeping nightmare of, well, I only use 6 chairs, not 10 chairs, and I'd like my $4 back. We have no way to prove that, so we would like to say this is what you get for these types of usage. I also have some feedback from a board member who had asked about doing this, that we have too many groups. Some sort of uniformity in their discounts and how they are placed. We have some spaces that no matter what group you are on the outside, you are charged the same. Some groups are charged differently based upon what you are at that point in time. They are proposing 3 categories. One be the school district, one be a nonprofit, and one be a for-profit. And then a different discounting feature through. The areas of use should not be broken down as much. So this is another example of one of those really oddity things like the projector. You can literally rent the hallway behind the auditorium. So if you use the auditorium, you get charged for that hallway, but John couldn't come in and he couldn't rent just the hallway while I'm having my event in the auditorium. Somehow that got written into policy over the years and into the fee schedule. It was one of those 2 that was out there, and I find it very odd. It's not like you're going to be using it for something else. In terms of the Silver Lining Arts Center, all groups should pay for the theater use. was the feedback that we received. It should be discounted for nonprofit versus for-profits. It is one of the few that does not have a tiered rental space, and maybe the only large space that we put out there. As we look at the Silver Lining Arts Center, being able to kind of make some changes in how we operate, I go back to we have a lot of processes, but it wasn't outlined. So as people have changed, the process changed kind of regularly. And really, you know, they said it very well. I'd like to see a simpler and fair process for renting out our valuable public resources. It's great that we have them. They're already subsidized to an extent by our taxpayers, but how do we get them out further? And so that's kind of where we are at today with our feedback. Before I go into the analysis of what we found with other policies, any questions? All right. So when you look in your packet in what's online in board docs, the first thing we did is we analyzed the number of groups that each district had. So I chose districts nearby and even a few further away that have some unique rentals. So for example, Plymouth has a unique rental. They have an indoor athletic space off their high school that is a turf spot. It's right in with their community education. They have a weight room that's open to the community, their gyms and their pool and so forth. So the first table that you see in there is the number of groups that are outlined in their policies. We have 8. Everybody else has anywhere between 3 and 5, with 5 being the average. Menominee Falls does have a unique breakdown where they have one group that's split into 2 different discounted rates. But nobody seems to have more than 5. So that's our first recommendation, is looking to bring this lower at that point in time. Any questions or feedback on that? Because that is one of the questions that we would like some guidance on.
I really don't have an objection to the number of groups. 8 just intuitively seems like a lot, but what I would say, well, but what I would say is it's got to work ultimately for whatever the goal is.
Yep.
And so if, you know, the idea of for-profit, not-for-profit, the school, I mean, that certainly makes sense, but it's got to be something that's able to be administered, and maybe we'll talk about this at the end and I'll reserve some comments, but to say whatever the goal is. Well, maybe we'll talk about it now. We are not running a for-profit convention center, but I do feel strongly that we should feel free to charge something that reflects what out-of-pocket costs may be. We're not maybe charging for depreciation on the building. We're maybe not charging for electricity. But if there's somebody coming in who has to take an extra shift to clean or set up chairs, I don't think it's unreasonable, you know, to take care of that. As it relates then to the number of groups, it's got to be something that makes sense to the community and is able to be administered, and it's not unwieldy. And so 8 seems like a lot. 3, 5, I mean, I'm kind of open to either of those with administration's recommendation. Dr. Tabans?
Yeah, this might be a little contrarian here, but I don't really think that, I'm not sure that we needed to even separate the groups of not-for-profit and for-profit, to be honest. I mean, the wear and tear on the building is really no different. And organizations like Freighter and Aurora are not-for-profit. I mean, and they're $6 billion companies. So, you know, I mean, I don't think all not-for-profits are, I get where we're getting at. It's like, well, it's a boys and girls club, so let's let them use it. Like, I get that. And I'm not opposed to that, but I'm just saying, like, I don't know that we have to separate those two. I mean, usage of the facilities, usage of the facility, the cost to the district doesn't change. And we have to be mindful that it's not us being charitable to the not-for-profit by doing this. It's us assuming that all of the taxpayers want to be charitable to that not-for-profit. You know, it's not just about a feel-good, like, well, it's for the kids. I'm good with that. I'm fine with that, you know. But I also am trying to put my hat on as far as, like, why does it make sense for a taxpayer to be sort of like automatically giving a discount to some group that's a not-for-profit, when the usage and the tax expense or the fee to cover wear and tear on equipment and staff and stuff like that is no different. School facilities, school functions, 100%. I'm good. So in my mind, when I'm looking at these 8 groups here, I mean, and it is confusing because churches fall into 2 different groups. It's like, well, I'm this church. No, I'm the cheaper church. You know, like, which one is it? So in my mind, I would say, you know, churches also, again, I'm an advocate, but I feel like it's not necessarily, we shouldn't be taking the assumption that the rest of the community is comfortable spending tax dollars to discount church usage of our facilities. I don't know that that's a great use of it.
I completely hear what he's saying and completely I don't understand why the price is different, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
If it's the cost of what it is to rent it, but at the same time, if it's a community for profit that pays taxes in this community, they shouldn't be charged any different than somebody that's a not for profit. But if they are there to gain money and put a thing on, I would say that's a good reason, you know, they're coming in facility to make money. You know, they shouldn't get a huge discount just because of, they're there to make money. I mean, I just see that, you know, you got churches and stuff like that, they don't have a ton of money for kids to have, you know, things like this. Yes, they have buildings and stuff, and they can do that there if they want to, and most of the time they do. But if they wanted to rent a field house or something to play basketball, you know, it's,
On the contrary, I don't know
we
that
we
they-
do
I don't
we
know
do
that
the
they pay
same we do the
property
same
taxes.
thing we do the same thing for in this country by not charging taxes for not-for-profits.
Right.
They can go to the store and buy the same items you buy, and you have to cover their end of the taxes on your bill.
Right, that's.
I'm just we do that already. So to give a little discount,
I think we can clean it up. I think you're agreeing. I think you could clean it up by saying there's group sponsored activities, which should be covered by the district, both custodial and fee. And then I think there are non-school sponsored activities that involve our students, so like organizations, okay, but they involve our students or our staff that can be approved for, you know, the custodial fee is the custodial fee, but the discounted fee on usage of facility, I could see that. And then I would say there are non-school related activities that includes all profit and not-for-profit at one tier. And I don't really see
So-
why we need to do it differently than
Each
that.
of you have said two key things around centering around kids and opportunity and how you create those. So I have seen in some areas where that is how you do your groups, and then you just have to quantify a little bit more where what percentage of the group has to be our students. Because can they make sure and grab one of our kids and now your kids are in it? So there's ways to do it that's a driver by, are we creating opportunities for kids in our schools and our community? And, you know, is, like you said, is it school-sponsored? All in, absolutely no question. Is it a group that's largely engaging our students or our community's kids? And then is it maybe external and they might have some access? There's ways to kind of make those your groups around student participation.
I think if it's
too.
a student-run organization.
Yeah, those are easy.
You know, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a no-brainer. I would say that if you're gonna look and say, well, that's why I don't think it should necessarily be written as this just includes some of our students. I would say these are organizations that aren't necessarily sponsored or sanctioned by the school, but that are that are organized by students or staff in this, you know, in this district. And it's like, well, we're not officially a school-sanctioned organization or club, but we're all West Bend students or whatever, and we just need a space. It's like, okay, sure, we'll have to charge you the cleaning space, but we won't charge you to use the space.
So in your big example of large policies from all these different districts, Cedarburg has something like that. So for their category 2, they consider them called Cedarburg-based events and organizations that are not affiliated with the school district, but have the betterment of the people in the community, civic groups, the township, Boy Scouts, you know, Park and Rec, everything else. And then it says that those youth organizations who have members that are under 18, 75% of them must consist of.
I'd be fine with putting a number on it.
There's an actual
Yeah.
number on that?
Yeah.
And we can certainly research that further,
I
what
mean,
that is.
That's very reasonable. I would have even said more than half.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if more than half of the kids in a club belong to the district and some are homeschooled and some are, wherever else, sure. But
Yeah,
I don't think we need to, for businesses, for organizations, for groups that collect money, it should just be one tier. And look, I'm not trying to put any hardship on these smaller not-for-profit groups, but I mean, it just.
they'll weigh their prices when they do it.
It's
I
just,
don't.
yeah, it should just be the fee to the district, to the taxpayers is no different.
I don't disagree. I don't understand why we have different fees. I think if they were, it would be non-resident versus resident fees. If you're a resident, you should get the straight cost of what it costs to run that facility for that time. Non-resident, they don't pay the taxes to subsidize it for themselves. So that would be where I can see a compromise in the structure of the pricing. But I mean, it doesn't make any sense really to, the discounted rate doesn't, if it doesn't cover the cost, then what are we are, they do have tax credits and things like that, and I do want to see them be able to use facilities they want. They're not that expensive. I mean, you know,
So just to revisit, when we talk about the groups, I think there are two things in play. One is fees, which are all modest, and I don't want to discount that because, $100 may be a big deal to some organizations and not. But is the second thing that I heard kind of the order of priority. So I'm envisioning, I like to think of extremes. So if group one is the high school drama class, the high school drama class should have probably first dibs on the use of the Silver Lining Arts Center. If group at the tail end, whatever it is, 3 or 5, is West Bend Insurance Company who would like to use the Silver Lining Arts Center for an agency training thing so that we can roll out a new product, we should have last dibs on that. So I'm assuming that's also one of the reasons for this, so the prioritization?
Yes, that's what we want to build. So it has been on and off if we just open it to internal groups, our groups, what's called Group 1 first. Some years they've just opened it up to everybody. This year we gave our groups priority to get our athletics in, our drama stuff, are using our concerts, things like that. There are districts, I believe it's Germantown or Menominee Falls, who has Group 1 is here, then 3 weeks later it's Group 2, Group 4, 3, 4, 5, whatever number of groups you have. That also truly helps on the influx. Like, we just open this up internally, and a good chunk of Laura's day is just dealing with facility scheduling, just with our internal, because people are waiting for us to open that up. We want to give priority. Yes, we always have the right to bump if you have something coming in from West Bend Mutual and all of a sudden now we have a real need for an athletic event, right? We always have that right, but we want to get into some sort of sequential thing that isn't what Tim made up or what, Jen made up or whomever. This is, and then it goes on our website and every group knows who they are when they go in at that point.
Do you open it up traditionally like for the year? Like, okay, today opens it up for the year and
You typically
and you
open
can
up
only
for a
book
calendar year. So what
three-
we
So
yep.
365
Yeah. So
in
what we
advance.
want to get into is we like summer to June. So, that's really, we're looking at June 1 to June 1. Like this year's an oddity with the facility work tied to the referendum. We held a little longer than what typically was done, but we couldn't say what was available at that point. And they were our heavy usage items other than the high school Silver Lining Arts Center.
So you
But
do it
we
as a-
want to open up a year at a time. So many of the districts that I saw, so if it's a June 1 start, they're opening up in February or May or even January at that point in time.
Okay.
We have people who want to book the Silver Lining Arts Center 2 years out. At least then they would know where it is. But we also want to, I kind of like that whole, if you booked it last year, you get first dibs. If you've been a 35-year user, your group was of the Silver Lining Arts Center, then we should bring you back the next year and give you first dibs, which we want to put that in there.
Do you open it up, anticipate opening up, so you'd open up on a rolling basis? So you might say, we're gonna open for next calendar year or whatever date you're gonna start, June 1st or whatever, we're gonna open it, January 30th or February 1st is the date it opens up, and from February to March, only Tier 1 can
Yes.
book.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Tier 1 needs to be responsible enough to know that's their chance to book.
And you know what? We did that for the first time again in a long time here, and our staff and our community people who work and run events for us were so thankful. They had a couple of days to get their stuff in for us to review before it opens up to everybody
you-
else.
you give
I
it-
open up a gym, I open up the Silver Lining Arts Center, I open up the football field, the baseball field. That gets picked up pretty fast, and we want to make sure we have that preference.
And then like March 1st, Tier 2 has a cracked schedule, and then after Tier 3, then any leftover spots can be picked up at any point. I think that's
That's what we're
completely
looking for.
reasonable. I don't see why, as far as the dates go, I say whatever works best for you guys as scheduling, but I think a rolling tier, and then if 2 people in the same tier want the same date, the group who had it last year should get first rights to have it that year, I would think, if it's a recurring event.
it wouldn't just be first, whoever signs up for it first.
I think it's a recurring event makes more sense. I feel like for.
Yeah,
like
but
you
at the
said.
same time, if you're not planning ahead, I mean, you snooze, you lose.
I think the question, so I'll get into the realization. It opens up at 8 AM. You're the 25-year person, you hit submit at 8:01, and Chad puts it in at 8:00, in 32 seconds. And again, that seems to be predominantly an issue with the auditorium and the Silver Lining Arts Center. We have enough gyms that I can move people around to make things happen. That piece really of that recurring piece would only apply to the auditorium at that point in time. I would not necessarily apply it to the field house or Badgers gym or something else. That would be
But
specific to the
one
auditorium.
use facility, I'm okay with giving some. Maybe put maybe if it's within the same day, you know, maybe if someone, I mean, because I get it, first come, first serve, you might be like, hey, I've been trying to get this date forever. It works best for us, but we can never get it. It might be nice to be like, okay, well, if we both put it in on the day one, I guess it goes to who had it first, but maybe if it's like, if I put it in today and you don't put it in until tomorrow, then I put it in first. I don't know how you want to do it. I don't know how often that's a problem, but I understand the, trying to be fair around
It
it.
typically shows a little bit in the large groups using the auditorium. And this year, we have more requests to the auditorium with UWWC not being online currently in their auditorium. All of those people had to find spaces to go, so we've had a lot of interest in reaching out to use our auditorium. And as people come and experience it, we just had a dance company out of either Northern Illinois or Southern Wisconsin. I'm not a dance expert, but like they came here and had their contest here Saturday and Sunday, and they were just amazed at our facilities, and they will probably come back again. They would be that last group to pick and choose at that point in time.
Sure.
Well, I'm open to some thoughts around prioritizing this, and my guess is other districts have wrestled with this and have some ideas. I am open to the idea of, you know, kind of, okay, it's time for group two, and maybe the first week is, all right, the folks who had it last year, you've got a limited period of time to claim your window, otherwise it's open to all group two, whatever it may be. But,
That's, you know, a legacy period or something.
right, I'm sure there are different ways to handle it. I'm open to the idea.
Okay.
Oh, and lastly, I guess as it relates then to the prioritization of the calendar, 8 still seems like a lot. So if 3 works or is workable when you look at, well, the volume of the groups, or if somehow that needs to be split up a little bit more, I'm almost loath to split it up more, but if that somehow helps based on the volume, that would be a reason to have more groups, but I think fewer groups make sense if at all possible.
Yeah, I'd be open for 3 groups.
Whatever you guys figure out.
All right. The next area that we're looking for feedback on is what we charge. So we talked about who we charge, we talked about the fact of who we charged. So we are looking at what we charge and who we charge. And so I made some comparisons to kind of 3 spaces that are, you know, kind of often rented in a school. Number 1 being any sort of gym, okay? Does not matter. I could open up Green Trees Gym till 11 o'clock at night. Somebody would rent the space for youth sports typically. Baseball, softball fields, so an outdoor type facility, and then also our auditorium. And so what you see here is a comparison across districts. It always starts with free, because nobody charges their own groups. And what you see as the dollar there is the top end that they charge, which is typically a for-profit company, and then they have their discounts, and everybody's discount is so different, it was hard to make the comparison, which is why I gave you the range. So, for example, renting a field house or a south gym, which are our 2 facilities at the high school, for us, it's at top, it's $80 an hour. That gives you all 4 courts in the field house. Some charge 85, some charge 40. I can also tell you they don't have 4-place courts. Some only have 2 courts in their facilities. Menominee Falls is up to 165 for their full gym. Germantown is 228. There's 4 courts available, and you have to take 2 at Cedarburg. So as we talk about this, I'll give you some examples of each of the comparisons. What we are looking for feedback on is where you feel we are in charging, and we use that top end for-profit, cover our costs for everything. But then also the conversation of who we charge, because in our current model, you really have to be 5, 6, 7, and 8 to get charged at that point in time, which goes back to that earlier conversation. When you look at the baseball and softball fields, this is the one place where we break a little bit of a normal in our hourly rate here is that we rent our outside fields by 2-hour blocks of time. So if you want to rent a baseball field or a softball field, it is $30 per 2 hours. And that's what the cost is for that. We do not charge anything extra for lights on those fields. Some are $85 for the whole complex, like Slinger. Some are by quote only. So Plymouth, you got to put it in. You ask for your time, what all your needs, and they provide you a quote. We don't have the staffing to be able to do individualized quotes for everybody's needs.
Theirs by hours also?
Yeah, those are typically by hours for them. We are the only one who charges by 2-hour time slots that I could find from what I read. And many of them also do additional charges. Like, we do have an additional charge for scoreboard, but they charge for a press box, they charge for your concession stand. That varies by district, and that's where we will come back and we want to shorten that list of things. What we want is, we want to make it so straightforward for the people who are using our facilities. It's like going to a restaurant and picking off the menu what you want, and you know everything is there. If it's not on that list, we are not offering that to you for us to rent at that point in time.
And how do you come up with these numbers?
So these numbers came up with a long time ago, to be honest with you, John. A lot of it is some wear and tear. A lot of it, when you get to outdoor fields, like a baseball field and a softball field, is the time to line it and maintain it.
Okay.
So it's from cutting grass, it's from.
It's literally an hourly
dragging the
rate.
field, it's to cleaning the dugouts, all those types of
Because
things.
when I see like your field houses and stuff like that, I mean, are you calculating the light usage and calculating the per
We can
watt
now.
pricing?
Probably when these were developed, they weren't. We can now. Like, we have the ability to monitor some of those types of things. We make adjustments to that. Each facility is a little different. There is some wear and tear built into those costs to recoup some of that, but it does not cover necessarily the full cost in all these, especially when you get into the discounted pieces. In our current model, our youth sports, park and rec, none of those groups pay anything. So if they come and use our pool, they come and use our football field, they come and use our softball field, baseball fields, our gyms, we don't charge for that at that point in time.
That's not standard practice across districts.
But, I mean, if we're talking about, not caring so much about not-for-profit and for-profit or whatever, and we just structure it based on the actual cost, add a whatever percentage for wear and tear if we need to, and then, I mean, obviously, if it's a non-resident that doesn't pay taxes here, like I said, I could totally see them paying more because they don't subsidize themselves paying.
And why don't we, on some of those spaces, since we have that capacity now, show you a little bit more of that cost? Then we can, like you said, we can wrestle with, is there wear and tear, is there, mark up, mark down? But maybe getting to, like you said, if I'm renting this field and I need lights and I need access to the bathrooms, concessions, I've got to line it and drag it and be done with that. Like, some standard spaces, we could show you, like, what are those costs?
See, and
Is this outside of custodial costs?
No, so often that's included in your fee. So when you rent the facility for a field house, that's included. For example, at the high school, we staff 6 days a week, 2 shifts. So your chances of paying, well, actually 7 days a week, because we have to staff there on Sunday. So your chances of paying a facility fee or a custodial fee are very little. So it is covering that time for them to work, because they are getting drawn away. So we had this dance competition in here this weekend. We had to clean 12 classrooms, we had to clean the auditoriums, we had to constantly keep up on the bathrooms. So there are ongoing costs for that. If it's snowing, we have to deal with that, right?
I mean, would it be reasonable to separate out custodial costs as a separate
We
cost?
certainly
And
could.
here's why I'm thinking that is because, for example, I don't know how long it takes to groom a field and do the lines and open up the concessions and turn the lights on and run the scoreboard and make sure things are working and gates are unlocked and whatever. But I'm assuming that $15 doesn't cover that. I mean, not in today's wages, there's no way. So, I mean, I would say it would make sense, because that is a cost that's gonna be, I say we just look at these different events and say, here's what it's gonna cost us to have one of our staff come out and do this. Here's what it's gonna cost us to have our staff clean the auditorium or clean the field house and mop the field house and pull out the bleachers or whatever they gotta
So
do.
Cedarburg and one other one has that, where if you rent their field house, you also pay on the weekend a $40 an hour custodial fee. So
Yeah.
you have a facility rental fee and you have a staff rental fee, and then it's very clear, it's not maybe charged or will be charged.
No,
It's,
it's
you
charged.
get both for that.
The only way it would make sense is if it's something they're already gonna clean, and you have that in there. It says if it's during school hours, there's no custodial fee. Well, yeah, because they're gonna come clean at the end of the day anyway. So you kind of, not necessarily something you wanna charge for, but if it's anything after hours, period, it should, or if it's an unused space, even like, well, we're doing this at 3:00 and you guys are still around till 5. It's like, yeah, but no one was gonna use this space. We have to go clean this now because you used it. I mean, that should just be charged.
yeah, I don't disagree, because if it's, there has to be a cleaning fee. Obviously, someone's got to pay for that. This is a not-for-profit business here, so we can't be making money on these. That's why I kind of like, I can't imagine they're gonna be super expensive, but you gotta pay for lights, you gotta pay for, percentage for wear and tear, whatever that might be. But what I'm a little concerned about is, there's a lot of facilities. And to calculate all those little pieces, how much is that gonna cost someone in time that we already have on the district, outside of their normal duties to actually calculate all that stuff? Or do we have, you might have something, similar to like a mechanic where each job is billed at 30 minutes for this, an hour and a half for this, a booth or whatever is 30 minutes to clean or whatever, you might have those things kind of lined out, and that might be easier, but, to go through all of these things and calculate wattage and stuff, because that's really the cost. Like I said,
We
this is a
wouldn't.
not-for-profit
wouldn't do
business.
that.
and-
Yeah,
But you got to.
But we
We can't
can
make
do it
money on
once.
our community members because this is not a company that's making money. We're,
But to your point, we would do the work once. So
Yep.
I know, and now with our mechanicals and things now, I can tell you exactly how much it cost me to turn the lights on at Silverbrook for an hour.
and I would assume.
And then I
with-
can build that package
Yeah.
price
Yep.
and show you, like, this is how we built this price.
Okay.
Here are the pieces in it. But like you said, we wouldn't be billing like that. We would just use it to build what's the
Yeah.
package
Yeah.
price.
Right, and okay,
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
I didn't.
Not a,
Yeah,
not
that'd be
a,
a
not a
nightmare
per
job.
usage thing.
Yes.
It's,
No,
it's
no, not-
literally a
No, yes,
pre-established
not per
price.
usage. I'm just saying, like, I was kind of assuming we had kind of a ballpark of, this is how much it costs to turn the gym lights on for an hour. And
So
this
we
is
have,
what-
we have
yeah.
meters for that.
Okay,
We have a
good.
classroom that we purposely, Dave Ross and the team here had put on a meter so that I can tell you what one classroom costs at the high school. Well, guess what? They're very similar across the
Yeah,
board.
right.
Now I know what that cost is. I can figure some of those things out. Just like you talked about cleaning, we have standards for cleaning of how long it takes to clean a room of this size in a classroom. We can figure those things out and try to build that in there, plus some wear and tear. And you're gonna have, you're gonna have, parking lot, cleaning if it's winter. We're not gonna get into that detail, but what we don't wanna do is we're not trying to make, excess amount of money, but
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not about that,
The way
but
we're
it's
set
it's
up-
about recouping
yeah,
costs
the
that
way
you're
we're set up
actually
right now
spending.
is I will tell you, based upon the 8 groupings, we don't charge hardly at all because many of our groups sit in groups 1 through 5.
Well,
Sure.
And it's not about making money as a source of income, but you also don't necessarily want to lose money by offering these facilities, because that's not really fair to people who aren't using facilities, but now they're like, well, this is part of our maintenance cost now.
Yeah,
you know?
I agree. I mean, I think if we looked at it from, if you asked the board, what should the philosophy be? I would say, like I said before, we're not running a for-profit convention center, but at the same time, actual out-of-pocket costs should be something that's
Should be subsidized.
reimbursed.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that would be,
That's the.
that's, I
Agreed.
think that's kind of the overarching philosophy, and I also like, and thank you, John, for bringing that up, we don't want to make this such a bookkeeping nightmare that we're actually losing money on it because we're checking boxes and billing and fractions of hours, so simplicity is important as well.
Yeah, I agree.
And I did assume it was gonna be a one-time, we're gonna go over all the numbers, but I just didn't know if it was gonna be like weeks of someone going through.
No, some of that we already
Well, more
have.
accessible than
Yeah.
it used
Sometimes we already have some of those things on hand. We have those standards. And then the last one on here is the auditorium. And you can see the rental fee changes. We charge a flat fee for any non-school district group that it doesn't have some sort of a prior agreement with us or is not, that way, is $130 an hour. That includes your auditorium staff person, so it's somebody that, monitors or checks you in, is somebody who knows how to use the auditorium, or somebody who is at least get you in the right place. We do have the ability to charge to move the pit cover in and out, so we have a removable pit cover in the auditorium. It just says real time. There are many districts who do a flat fee to put in and out for an event. Our rule here of thumb is we try to keep it in as much as possible and only remove it upon request, but in going back and looking, we have not charged that fee. That can take 4 or 5 guys an hour and a half to 2 hours to do, one way, because then we gotta typically return it back. So that would be something we would bring back a
It
recommendation.
has to be
on.
subsidized. That's a real cost. You're talking about 4 people's income for an hour and a half.
And we're pulling those people
That's-
typically from other work.
What's a diversion
that
from your
costs-
normal
that costs
duties?
more than the fee to rent the whole place, and they're getting that basically thrown in for free.
Yes.
you know.
Slinger does a little different. They do, their max cost is $200 an hour, but then they also charge $180 per event for their technician. Every time you do things differently, I don't know how many hours that's based on. If my event is an hour and, you know, Chad's is 5 hours, it looks like it's the same fee. Some have a very small auditorium. Plymouth's fees are very, at what I would call the lower end when I look at policies, and some are up to $300 an hour to rent, plus staff fees. And so I think this is one that we will have to look at as we go through that. We seem to be sitting in the middle of the road right now, depending upon how you break down some of those, that in-between group of that kind of discounted group at that point in time.
I think part of the thought exercise is around, all right, well, how much is that? Because I'm assuming, and I don't mean to speak for my fellow committee members here, but none of us are looking at this as, we've got to quadruple these fees. I don't want any of our groups to be worried. At the same time, I do think the philosophy is, look, we are willing, this is a community asset, and we are willing to share it. And I like the idea of the prioritization that we had talked about, but also the idea of, just to be fair, it's, well, whatever our out-of-pocket is,
Yeah.
you know, we're willing to pass that through, not in the sense of making money on it, but in the sense of, fairness to the taxpayers as well.
Yeah.
And the
that's-
budget's set to run the school with the school's need in mind, you know, not the communities wanting to rent, you know, the pieces. So it does got to break even somewhere. So, I mean, if the fee's got to be the fee, it is what it is.
We've gotten some feedback, generally. Have we gotten feedback, the fees? They're cheap, they're expensive, they're okay?
Depends upon who you talk to.
Okay.
For every person that tells me you charge too much, somebody goes, I can't believe I get it for this. That's kind of where we're at. Of course, everybody would love it cheaper. And I get, they are in the same boat if they are fundraising to hold their event, right? Sure. If they are starting to do those things, you know, there are different things that they are pseudo, depending upon how we redo the groups, where our kids get to attend events for free. Well, that plays into something. You had youth football who was involved in fundraising and granting a large chunk of money for the turf field when it was done. So they had an agreement, you know, at time of using that where it isn't charged. Right now, I think the biggest thing is that cutoff of who pays and who does not. Because right now you have to get down to group 5 or group 6, which is basically nonprofit groups outside of West Bend School District for profit groups, and other groups at that point in time. Everybody above that does not pay a facility rental fee at this point. That's from Parks and Recs to youth sports, et cetera. And so from what if I'm hearing the three of you correctly, you would like us to revisit that somewhere in there in that process.
I would say yes. I think also, though, just the analysis of, generally speaking, what does this cost, is going to help inform all 7 board members of, you know, if we look, for instance, if the board would look to a group of organizations and say, maybe we shouldn't charge them, well, we should know what we're getting into as it relates to the costs, and that'll help inform. But I like the idea of, well, let's take a fresh look at it.
Any other feedback? Otherwise, I think that gives me enough to start the process to come back with something in the next couple of months.
We do, go ahead.
Sorry,
Chad,
I'm
no,
just
no, it's
looking at the tiers. I mean, tier 4 looks like it should definitely have, if you're looking at our current tiers, I mean, I'm somewhere between, depending on what group you would put a tier into, I'm somewhere between 3 and, you know, I think starting at 3, there should be fees. Because there's cost to that, you know. And again, I think you can just you can redefine what groups fit in which, because I'm not even sure. I think I almost feel like group 3 should be group 2 and vice versa. Actually don't think group 2 should be group 2.
I get what you're saying. And I think that's that prioritize of, you know, I know general down kids first, right? Like
Yeah,
what that is. That's wonderful, but you know, when you're using our fields, our pool, whatever else,
Yeah.
those groups from Park and Rec to school-related activity groups to, you know, youth groups, none of them are paying a usage fee at all to use that facility. So,
Sorry. I would just say, yeah, I would say, non-school related groups or clubs should be paying. You know, if it's a school club, I mean, group 3 is school related activity. You're not gonna, the PTO is raising money for the school. So, you know, I would agree that they shouldn't pay, but I mean, after that, you got groups that if they want to use the facilities, and there's a cost to it.
And many of
That's
those-
why I mean, switching group 2 and 3 seems to make more sense to me.
The
just-
rec department, again, that's But if we don't offer clubs or sports for kids at certain age, then they, you know, they can't offer it for them if they have to pay too much or they have to charge those kids either way. So, you know, some of those recreational.
But you pay to go to most of those rec things. My kids were in rec sports, I had to.
It's not that expensive, though.
No, but
It's-
it's all the kids pay, and that's what I'm saying.
But
So
it will
if
be more.
we had to pay for,
I'm just saying, like, if it's a four-year-old T-ball, they don't offer that at a school. If it was, they'd get it for free.
right,
But, so, that's a hard one for me, because, I
but you
mean,
pay to be in we pay for being T-ball.
because they don't offer it in school. So
Right.
you already are paying a fee. I get it, but I don't think they're making a lot of money. They're paying their refs, and that's about it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's designed to make money either.
Yeah.
So again, I agree. I think we just need to tighten up the.
John, I think the
team.
group
I'll
you're
take
talking
yours.
about a lot is Group 4, your non-school sponsored sports. That's your youth sports teams, that's your scouts, that's your Boys and Girls Club, Little League, things like that. That, I think, is what you're referencing, maybe not Park and Rec in there. Is there a difference?
No, well, because he was saying switch Group 2 and
Okay.
3. I was just saying, the Group 2, I'm not opposed to them getting to use some of the facilities.
Well, I think the good discussion that we've had just shows that crisp lines are hard to draw, and for this, and for good reason.
Thank you.
I guess if I just, one just general question. So I'm very glad to hear that we had received input from other groups. So as we're going along, obviously, you're going to do some work. It's either going to get exposed to the board, it's going to get exposed to this committee. How would these groups have perhaps opportunity to get involved? Would it be through that process or monitoring? We should just think about that, I guess.
Yeah,
If there's
I-
additional input or additional touch points,
I think we
how
have
or when?
Kind of a map and all of our users, so as we
Sure.
look at that, no different, like when we meet with everyone who does 4K and early learning and how we kind of convene and talk about and think about, like, hey, this is right for change, what's your input on the front end? So that we can keep that in mind, that's helpful.
And I'm sure there are a large number of groups. We're not able to make everyone perfectly happy, but it's good to get that input. Okay. Other questions? Thank you for tackling this. It's a good issue. All right. That takes us to the review of the 200 series, which is administration. And Superintendent Wimmer?
Sure, there's 200 series has 2 policies in it, and it has to do with school board superintendent relations. These were, they're not long overdue, there's no updates from WASB, there's nothing in there. In that first one was looking at, we had made the determination to use the word school board consistently, so that policy reflects that. When you look at that piece, and then the second one, same thing, just updating it so that they both reflect school board. They talk about the evaluation process. People will see lots of closed sessions as we kind of enter March. Board president and I were just talking about my evaluation cycle and how that goes. That covers that, so that's upcoming. But as far as language, we just need to align that. There were no other recommendations for change.
Committee members, any questions?
No.
Otherwise, this then will come back.
Yeah.
And we can do it as a first reading. I would think it's probably something that's more cosmetic than anything else, but
Yep,
if we want
I-
to batch them all together as first readings, I have no problem with that
Yep,
either.
I agree. I think you'll probably feel the same way around the 700 series. We did list all the 700 series, but then we gave you kind of 3 buckets. So if you want to take, but we talked about, as we review it, updating the review date. So we'd bring it forward, even though there's no changes, but formalize that first review. There's a bucket, 700 series, no change. So if you look at that, there is no changes. That's safe and healthful facilities, emergency school closings, metal detector usage, that's relatively new, as well as use of copyrighted materials. We have no recommendation for change, no cosmetic things that needed updating there. I'd like to bring them forward just to update that formal date of review. So,
Yeah, and we went over those last year already, right?
yeah, we're just sticking with that cycle.
Yep.
In that next, there's 700 series changes to format. So if you look at those, the first one's 723, in the tabs, so when you're tabbing in, we just cleaned up the spacing. So there's 4 or 5 green boxes that show you that we spaced them over to clean up the format of that.
So no words added, just spacing
No,
changes,
yep.
really?
So there, it
Okay.
was just a formatting issue, so I'd, again, bring that update forward and update that date.
Okay.
And then that last bucket is a little bit more around a content change. same as that 200 series. In 742, I'd be using the word school board in there consistently, no other changes. In that following one, 750,
Sorry, hold on.
Go ahead.
In that 742,
yes?
you're going to update that one?
Yes,
Okay, I
so-
was gonna say, because it's not updated, so
Yeah,
it's
with the
not-
word school,
It's hard to see.
the very
So
faint
it
green.
should be, it's showing up really faint on your scan. I'm inserting the word school.
This is what I'm seeing. It looks like you're seeing a different version.
I don't know, I'm seeing one that just says applicable
Yeah.
board
See, I got this
policy.
one.
Click
says
on the
school.
actual link.
Can you go
Yeah.
down? No, go down.
Yeah, there
Scroll
was a-
down and go into the
to the
bucket.
packet
Yep,
Changes.
there
I
you go.
got you. I was looking
There
at
you
the
go.
current policy.
And it is
No worries.
faint.
Thank
We
you.
talked about that. It's just highlighting, I'd add the word school, so it's school board. That's the only change for
I got you.
742. 751, that we should have conversation about. The content is around changing from a 10-passenger van to a 15-passenger van. They have some availability. We have some 12 passengers, and they do have some availability on 15, so I just want to cover us on that. Again, on that first page, you can see us tightening up some spacing, but the one piece that I highlighted in yellow that we need to have a discussion on, a multi-phase discussion, is around the walk distance for students. We had talked about this before.
John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just, the contracted transport, we don't ever use a 10-passenger anymore?
We do,
So how would we change it to 15? Because we would be limiting ourselves to only 15 or
oh,
more.
sorry, you're right. You're right, that's exactly inverted. It should be the 8 or more even. Yeah, it should be 8 on the other, our top end is 15, so 8 to 15.
Because it doesn't matter if it's 10 or, 10
No,
or more.
you're totally right, John.
Okay, I was like, am I?
Lenny and I were looking at that today, and don't ask me why we were saying the top end and not the bottom end. The biggest content that you need to have discussion on is around the walk distance. Recall, we have the issue where we're splitting households. They can put their family out to the curb, and I pick up one kid and send the others away. That needs to be cleaned up. And then when we reconfigure, we need to think about that in the future. So 4K, we would recommend that we hold at our current practice, which is a half a mile. There's no need to change that for the coming year. But we would like to standardize 5K through grade 4, so that's if you're all going to the same school. You all have access to the same transportation. So your decision is really, would you like to set that at a mile or a mile and a quarter?
Well, I mean, I'd love to set it at a mile as the lowest common denominator for the small legs. But also, I'm assuming then that has an impact on
Correct.
busing
So we
and
are having
costs,
we are
so-
having the bus company run that for next year, kind of what that would look like, that decision, what we would set it at a 1 or a 1.25, how many students would be impacted and what the cost implications are.
Yeah, do I recall that in prior years when we examined this, we received an exhibit that showed how many impacted individuals there might be if we drew it here or here? That's what you're contemplating?
So, yes, and I'd make a kind of a two-phased recommendation. So then in the future, we need to consider 4K through 5th grade as one, because 4K will now be embedded at our schools. Again, do you want to run your 4K transportation separate at that time and continue to have them just the half mile, which is fine, we can choose to do that. Or do we want to set that at a 1 or a 1 1/4, 4K through 5th grade, and then have grades 6 through 12? So again, I have the bus company running all options for what that future could look like. So that's when we, a couple of years from now, when we reconfigure and have 4K on-site at the elementary schools, what would that look like? At the half, the 1, the 1.25, and then 6, 12, recommend that we'd standardize at the 2 miles and under.
John?
I can't see a 4-year-old walking more than that. I mean, I can hardly see a 5-year, a kindergarten walking more than a half a mile. That's a lot. A mile's a lot for a kid that small. But we can still put in kind of a little piece about if you're, because if a family lives, let's say, 0.6 miles away, but there's a second grader, weren't we talking about
So you have pay-to-ride
Allow-
options?
Allowing that student, if there was room to
Yep.
ride? Okay.
So those are pay-to-ride options. So
I mean, but
let me
they're
clear this.
siblings
Yeah, so let me clear this
with
first
the
piece.
4, okay.
Is everyone okay with us costing and pursuing, keeping 4K at the half mile?
I think I'd like to see that option.
Okay, all right. So keeping that piece. And then you're right, if that route has room and there's those pieces and maybe someone else is, there's, if you've got a sibling on the bus, that kind of thing, they look at, can you offer that seat? And they do generally a pay-to-ride option. So you might not be eligible for transportation, but you can make it eligible. There's also where maybe sometimes people are really close, maybe they can go to the nearest stop. Like, I don't create new stops in there, but they can access a route. A lot of times you see where they're accessing transportation, if they're at grandma's, a sitter, we have all those variations. So get you the numbers for impact and not only numbers of impact, but the financial impact of 5K through fourth grade for that next year being at that 1 mile mark or the 1.25 mile mark.
Are we able to model or see, if we were to change these, how many, what words do I want to use? How many students would be disenfranchised by this, if you know what I'm saying? That if
That's
we
what I'm
did this,
saying.
it's like
The
you've now
number of
split this
students-
family.
Yeah, the number of students as well as the financial impact.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the scenario, we would certainly be able to tell if we increased, and I'm making this up, 5K to 1 mile, and there's a family with one child and they're in 5K and they're disenfranchised, it'll reflect that. But what about we have a family with 2 children, and now we extended one, and one still can ride the bus, but one cannot. That still would be picked
So
up.
the only thing I can project in that scenario, because I don't know quite how many
Yeah.
little kids are in the household, I can project into the next year, and because I've got them on
Got
that.
it.
So, I've got some household information, but I can't forecast multiple years out if there's a 3-year-old at home and are they coming and
Sure.
where would I split? But we do have them solidly working on this next year, and then some modeling for future years. So I'm going to have them model out, keeping 4K consistently, but then looking at aligning at either the 1.0 or the 1.25 mark for 5K through fourth grade, looking for impact, and remaining with where we are at 5-6 being the 1.75 mile.
Wouldn't it be through 5th grade? Because,
Not next year.
Okay.
The following year, yes.
so we're not planning.
I'm doing
for-
multi-tiers. I have them exploring for the future, but it's not anything right in front of
Gotcha.
me right now. Are you comfortable with, in the immediate future, while 5 and 6 is still split out, having that at 1.75 miles, and then grades 7 through 12 continuing at 2? I don't think you need to look at that and analyze it until we actually become 6, 8, 9, 12. I don't have a recommendation unless you want me to run the numbers at changing that in some way.
So the ones that are highlighted in yellow, that's what's presently in
This
place?
is what's currently
It's
in
presently
place.
in place, okay.
So we're going to run 4K staying the same. I'm going to look at 5K becoming 1.25 miles, or I'm going to look at grades 1 through 4 becoming 1 mile.
Is it 2 miles as the crow flies, or is it 2 miles?
2 miles
based
on the streets,
On the streets.
on the streets.
2 miles on the
It's
streets.
2 miles their walking path.
Okay.
So the statute is you're eligible at the 2 mile mark.
That's a long way.
It is a long way.
I'm just looking at a map of West Bend here and measuring out roughly 2 miles and seeing where that gets you. I mean, you can almost not live in West Bend and still have to walk to
So
school.
one of the oddest things is, again, I go back to the configuration of our wagon wheel of schools. Generally, you put in a school, you draw a radius around it, and you capitalize on how many kids can walk, and we just don't even have that with our schools.
No, I
how they
mean,
were
it's,
built.
it's like, I mean, it's crazy how far away from the school you can be. Like what you,
Oh.
envisioning the roads and stuff that they'd have
Yeah.
to walk on.
So
Like
you-
you can, like 2 miles, like that's just the Piggly Wiggly out on 33 is 2 miles from the high school.
You also
That
have
just seems like a
hazardous
long way to walk
transportation that impacts
way.
your eligibility. So if there's 4 lanes, you have all these declared hazardous places that they can't walk no matter what.
Okay.
So it has to be a safe route.
Yeah, I mean, it would be. It
So-
would be interesting to see. So if I'm within 2 miles, let's say I'm at 1.8 miles from the school.
Uh-huh.
But like 2 blocks over is a bus stop. Are you telling me I could just, are we saying I could just walk to the bus
So
stop instead
you're,
of walking to school?
yep, you're not eligible. However, if you're interested in transportation, you would call in and we would say, let's see if we can schedule you on that route.
Okay.
And then you can walk over that way and get on that
I
route.
mean, to me,
you
I
have to
think
pay.
that seems, yeah,
But
You-
is it an
because
extra
you're not
cost?
eligible.
Is it an extra cost actually to the bus, to pay for busing if they're not making an extra stop?
I don't think they should have to pay.
I
think-
agree.
I think you
That's
should-
what I was getting
Indirect
at, is
that.
I think
I
you
don't
should
know
have
if
to
you should have
walk
to.
to wherever is closer, the school or a bus stop. I
I-
mean, if you're literally
If-
closer to a bus
If the
stop,
buses
up.
have room and it doesn't cost anymore for an extra
There
route,
you
then
go.
I would
If they have
say
room.
they
I
don't
need
have
that.
to pay.
I can't make it open.
Because it could trip it to another
Yeah,
bus.
I'm like, no,
I get it.
you're
Now we
gonna
need a
create a
bus.
new
If they have
route.
room,
If
Go
there's
John's
room and
way.
available.
but I'm just saying, like, to me, it looks like, man, that would suck if you were at 1.9 miles and there's a bus stop a block away from you.
And if you got a first grader, that now has to walk because they're at a mile, or just over the limit, but the 5-year-old's brother doesn't have to walk. I don't
That's
think
what's been
that
so
family
weird.
should have to pay either, because
Yeah.
the bus is already coming to their location.
Right, that's what's been weird this whole time is where you roll up and you pick up one and leave the
If
others.
the bus
It's
is
just
full
weird.
and they have to send then it is what it
Yeah,
is.
and
But
I-
if there's room and we can,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
what the big
so
deal
I'm
is.
going to look at two pieces. I'm going to provide you the numbers. All I'm looking at, based on this conversation, is looking at 5K, the impact of going a mile, which is current practice, or 1.25. Inversely, I'm looking at grades 1 through 4 for next year, which makes it a school, community. I'm looking at that, bringing that down to a mile.
Yeah.
getting
And
us
looking
both
at, what-
options.
yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
That's right, it's a pair of
So I
options.
can try and transport the family.
It's gonna be so temporary though, right? Because I mean, what we should land on ultimately is, I would imagine, 3 tiers: 4K, 5K through 5.
Correct?
And then 6 through 12.
Correct, and that's.
Right.
No,
For your next
6,
trick.
6,
Yeah.
8, and then 9, 12.
I would recommend 612.
Yeah, I think
You-
it's 6.
But they don't go to the same schools.
No, but
Correct, but
no,
you're
same
just setting
distance.
eligibility determination.
distance. I
They're
mean,
already at 1.75.
A 6th grader can walk as far as.
You're saying same distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I'll have them analyze it for you.
you see, there's a difference between a 6th grader and an 8th grader or a 9th grader. Some of those kids are like, they got little legs.
I'm not.
I'll
I'm not
analyze it
saying-
both ways for
I-
you, so you
I'm
can
just-
hold at 1.75.
I'm just,
I would put, the 2 miles for me seems like that's the part that I'm having a problem with.
That is the state statute,
Yeah,
and
no, I
some
get
school
it.
districts hold it at that period.
It's just I mean,
Interesting.
and it's not the distance, it's not that kids, can't handle the distance, it's just the time, like.
Oh, I
if you're a
appreciate
fresh-
that
if
the
you're a-
board's open to
You're a
it.
freshman in high school, you start school at 7:25, you got a 40-minute walk, and if it's like, well, it's only -20 today, so school's open.
Yeah.
Now you got a 40-minute
you
walk
are.
in -20. That,
All the way up to
that just-
-29,
that just
Dr.
doesn't-
Chemez.
That just doesn't seem,
Well, my guess is
I wouldn't go.
whether it's software from the bus station or ours.
We have
we'll-
that
We
ability.
can model it, right? Because I think these gentlemen asked great
So
questions.
I'm hearing, so what I needed to get, that my board is open for me to take down that to 1 or 1.25.
Yeah, 1.
And that you're
Yeah.
all still solid with the half mile for 4K.
Yeah, that's not, I mean, that's. not
Great.
far. You can see that from your house.
And then we've got them modeling the others for the future. But that's my biggest thing.
I just want to make it as easy as possible for, I don't want to create a burden.
Yeah, I don't
for-
want, we
for
didn't
families.
want whole-scale change or inconvenience for families, but what is inconveniencing them is having different rules for kids
Yeah.
going to the same school.
Yeah.
So that's the only piece that we recommend cleaning up in here.
Well,
But so any hazardous area, so if I live 0.25 miles from the school, but I have to cross a hazardous area, I get busing?
Correct.
So I'll give you a real-life example, because I used to live there, just south of the high school. If you live on the east side of River Road, Ball Shakers Drive back there,
Correct.
there's no sidewalk and everything else. My kids, when they got to high school age, would have been bused to the high school. Bus stop, picked up.
From kitty corner to.
In my
from-
former district,
From a minute drive, but because it was a.
Hazardous
safe-
area.
hazardous
Yes, I
and
get
not
it,
safe.
yeah.
in my former district, the entire school district was declared hazardous because no sidewalks exist and you had door-to-door transportation.
wow.
So it's all driven by multiple factors.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to bring that back. I'll look at that impact and I'll bring this forward for that reading and we'll have those numbers for you so that the board
Great.
can be engaged in that discussion before we do anything for that,
Okay,
that one specifically. But that had, like I said, that was where we needed to talk through what I deemed content.
content changes?
Yep.
Any other content changes then to
No.
discuss? Okay. So we talked through the content ones, the
Pieces.
format
I
ones.
can't, yeah, I can't.
And the no changes.
I can't wait to laugh at Lenny about the van, because we both looked at that today, John.
was
And
flipped.
that's why there's a committee. In the next ones, they're largely the same. On the very tail end, the USDA non-discrimination statement, that's, we put the heading on to show that that's the USDA heading, and then we aligned those sections so that they were all consistent.
And then you're gonna change it from is and to is and
Is there a typo on one?
Yeah.
Which one are you at?
under the USDA non-discrimination statement, complaint info.
There's 3 of them. I'll
Oh,
double
it's-
check.
It's page,
Is it 9 of 11?
where are the,
Is it in the very first one?
yes, 9 of 11, page 9 of 11.
Okay, she might have copied that over
Oh, is
across the
and,
other.
A and D, equal
Institution
opportunity.
is and equal opportunity. I just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
if we're cleaning it, and it's highlighted even, so.
I know, I'm like,
They crossed out they actually crossed out the correct words.
I'll talk with Peggy about getting that cleaned up. But then the next
Right, like-
Yeah, they did.
3 have all
I
those,
am.
Yeah.
It's a good try.
typed it wrong. We'll clean it up. So that's what those ones are. And then in that last one, we'd update the word, we started using the word superintendent consistently versus district administrator. So
Also the spelling error you're
yeah,
gonna fix.
she did a cut and paste on all 3.
Okay.
So they're in 760, 61, and 63.
No,
So
no, there's a separate spelling error
Where are you?
on page 10 of 11, superintendent.
Oh, that's my new
Intended-
title.
intended-
I'll talk with her about cleaning up the spelling.
I mean, if that's
You know, while we're at it, we might as well
I'm
do
just-
it right the
I'm-
first time, shall we?
also on,
Good.
yeah, page 11 that she did, that
Yeah.
was correct. Yeah.
I will have her correct those.
It's just, I mean, I know it's an honest mistake, I just,
No, that's why
If we're
there's
fixing it, we should fix
multiple
it.
people looking at it. So those are the only ones in the series that would have change. If you're good with that, I would bring those forward, clean those up, bring those forward to the board for first readings on all of them. I'll bring the data around impact, so when it gets to decision point on the one on transportation, we have that piece with us.
I'm good with that.
Excellent.
Great. Anything else on this agenda item? As this was the last agenda item on the agenda?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Committee members, any other questions? Well, then, hearing none, we've reached the point to adjourn. Committee members, do we have consensus to adjourn?
Agreed.
Agreed? All right, we consider ourselves adjourned. Thank you to the administration for pulling this together, and we look forward to our next meeting.